Happy December, Penn State football fans. It is now December 1st. I'm Bob Flounders. It's the Blue White Breakdown podcast. Joining me, looking forward to this, Daniel Gallen, a Penn State beat writer like myself on the beat for PennLive. Been doing it all year, doing a great job. Dave Jones. Let's just say Dave Jones is on another assignment, Daniel. I think we could live with that, and it's not untrue. You never know what he's doing in downtown, but it's you and me. There's always Penn State news to talk about. I think we're probably going to lead with the all Big Ten teams that are now, I think, in the books. The offense, as we tape this, Daniel, has just been announced by the Big Ten. First of all, I hope you're doing well. I know it's been a bit of a rushed morning for you, but looking forward to talking with you. And I think we're going to be doing it. You and I are going to be doing a podcast once a week in the off season as well. I'm really looking forward to that. But how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I hope the listeners are ready for twice as much me during the week. You get me on Fridays with Dotson, and now I'll be earlier in the week with you. So I'm excited to be here and ready to talk some more Penn State football.
All right, double the pleasure with Daniel Gallen. Why not? All right, Daniel. So we are going to get to the defensive team, but that news is not stale. But this is probably there's some Penn State fans that aren't completely aware of who was represented by Penn State. But let's go through the Penn State guys on the offense. Obviously, Jahan Dotson was not only one of the best players in the Big Ten, one of the best players in the country. Sure to be a very early draft selection next April. Daniel, what can you tell me about him? And were there any other guys on the first and second teams for Penn State?
So Jahan Dotson was the only Penn State player to make a first or second team for the All Big Ten offense. And I think for anyone who watched the Penn State offense this year, that's not much of a surprise. I was trying to do a little work ahead a little bit, do a little brainstorming. And outside of Dotson, that was the only guy who I think performance-wise merited All Big Ten selection that high. You had a couple other guys that I think ended up getting votes based on reputation. But you look at Dotson, first teamer for the media, second teamer by the coaches for All Big Ten. David Bell was consensus by both media, the Purdue wide receiver, both media and the coaches. He was the Big Ten wide receiver of the year. I don't think that's a surprise. And then Chris Olave got voted first team by the coaches. Garrett Wilson was second team by the coaches. And
the other wideout. What about the
other? Jackson Smith and Jigba was third team by the media and third team by the coaches. And then Jaden Reed from Michigan State was third team for both. So I think obviously you look at the Big Ten wide receiver picture this year, you're splitting hairs. I think especially with these types of awards where you're trying to balance production with kind of versus the prospect, where Dotson's production is better than Olave's, but in some people's eyes, Olave might be a better wide receiver. Garrett Wilson might be a better wide receiver. I don't really have a problem with kind of how that shakes out. I mean, I do think that eye test wise, Dotson was such a magnetic player and such a gravitational player, but no surprise that he gets at least he makes one first team for All Big Ten. He was a third teamer by both the media and the coaches last year. So unsurprising there. And the wide receiver talent for a conference that's known for kind of ground and pound and its running backs. I mean, the wide receiver talent in the Big Ten this year was absolutely great. And especially when you factor in a guy like Dante Demas from Maryland got hurt at the beginning of October. It's another talented guy that isn't factoring in here. So that's how it shook out in terms of kind of the headliners, I think, for the offense.
All right. So you threw a lot of names at me. So I'm just going to back up real quick. So Dotson was second team coaches. Is that right? All Big Ten coaches?
Yes.
So the first team guys on the coaches ballot at wideout were Bell, Olave, and who was the third one?
Just Bell and Olave. They're only two wide receivers.
Don't pick three. Okay.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's something maybe they want to think about? Maybe the way that the game is played now, I mean, with the spreads, maybe it is time for three three first team choices at wideout. The Big Ten is usually slow though to do stuff like that.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
a
it
lot of
wouldn't.
one back, but yeah.
I mean, I think even if you just bumped it out to 12 guys
Yeah.
for first team, just add the third wide receiver in there, still have the two running backs and the tight end. I don't think anyone would really have a problem with that.
Okay, let's go through it. I'm going to throw some first team names at you real quick. Obviously, I'm going to guess that the quarterback was Ohio State's C.J. Stroud. The interesting thing for me was I had a vote. By the way, if you think the way they handle it, the All Big Ten handles it with the release and how they stagger it, you should try voting for this thing. The setup is it's something. I'll tell you, it's not easy on the eyes. There's a lot of work to be done, and that's another thing they need to really think about moving forward. But I thought running back was an interesting position to name two of them. I've said all year, and even going before the Ohio State-Michigan game, Daniel, I thought Hassan Haskins was by far the best runner Penn State faced this season. I thought his performance at Beaver Stadium in a very tight game, I mean, if he didn't do what he did, I mean, Michigan obviously is not going to win that game. Got a lot of hard yards, got a lot of carries because Corum was out. He hurt them as a receiver in the passing game. But I also know there's Travion Henderson and there's some other people. There's that Wisconsin back, that true freshman. So I wasn't sure how that was going to shake out. I'm going to guess it was Henderson and Hassan Haskins, but I could probably be wrong on this.
You're missing the guy that we just saw over the weekend, Kenneth Walker.
Oh
the
my
third.
God, I cannot believe I blanked on him. Oh, that's sad.
So we
That's
got
sad.
Haskins and Walker were the consensus first team selections,
Yeah.
and then Henderson and Braylon Allen, who I think in Dave Jones's stead, I have to mention that he was 17. That they were the two consensus second team selections.
Yeah, I apologize to Kenneth Walker. That was a bad oversight. It should have been. Yeah, I think they got it right. I think Henderson, the Ohio State back, is a great talent, but you know, aside from two carries in that game, and one was a big one against Penn State, he had to work for his yards. And I thought Haskins did a lot more. He was a more physical player. Good for him. And then he validated, you know, his first team selection with what he did against Ohio State. I know there's a lot of love for Tyler Linderbaum in the college football world. I know he was a first team selection on the offensive line, Daniel. I'm sure it was unanimous, both media and coaches. Any other news on the offensive line that kind of first and second team that kind of caught your eye?
No, not really. I think that you see kind of the familiar names. You've got a couple Ohio State guys in there, Munford, Petit Frere, guy from Wisconsin, Seltzner, and then the big Minnesota tackle, Daniel. I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name. But yeah, I mean, I think that we saw some pretty good offensive line play this season. I have an all Big Ten vote for the AP, and I gotta complete my ballot this weekend. So I think I'm going to be diving into some highlights and trying to look at some of these guys, because offensive line play, you're really splitting hairs there. I think it's easier to see the guys that aren't doing their jobs, because that's a lot more noticeable than the guys who are doing their jobs, unless it's someone pretty spectacular.
Yeah, and since you saw the Penn State offensive line play a lot, not doing their jobs, I think that phrase probably fits your description of some of the line play you saw. So no Michigan guys on the first team, no Michigan offensive, or was there one?
None on the coaches, and then for the media, Andrew Stuber made it.
I'm glad at least one of those guys made it. I'm sure they had some representation, on the second team. All right, so who were the Penn State guys, if any, that were third team selections, so we can look at that.
So Rasheed Walker was a third team selection by the media. He was honorable mention according to the coaches.
Mm-hmm.
And then let me find the graphic that has all of them. And then after Walker, no one else made first, second, or third team. Sean Clifford, honorable mention for both coaches and media, which I think, given kind of the step forward that he took this year, I think that's deserved. I did think it was overall, I did think the quarterback selection was interesting. Aiden O'Connell was the second team selection by
Mhm.
both the coaches and the media. Obviously, I didn't get the chance to watch a lot of Purdue this year. Um,
He
but
threw
I
for about 1,000,000,000 yards.
Yeah, but
He's got,
given how they kind of rotated those quarterbacks
yeah,
sometimes, I thought that was interesting. And then Cade McNamara, I think deservedly was
yeah,
the third teamer. Um, After Clifford, Juice Scruggs, honorable mention for both coaches and media.
right.
Brenton Strange, the tight end, honorable mention for media. I think that was deserved. And then Mike Miranda was honorable mention for the media too. He was a second team selection this year. Obviously had some struggles here
Yeah.
and there.
It's last year, second team All Big Ten guard. Walker got a little love, I think, on the third team. I think he might have made one of the third teams. But, Daniel, it just really, I hate to keep, beating the drum, but the play of Penn State's offensive line was a big factor in their, as they slowly uh, worked their way away from that unbeaten start and lost 5 of their last 7. I mean, the offensive line play, Daniel, was not good. Miranda and Walker, I just really thought, man, they're going to build off what they did in 2020, and they're going to, they got Noah Kane back, and I was really excited about Kevon Lee, even Keziah Holmes, and to see what happened, it was it was startling to me, Daniel, how poorly this group played, underperformed. I know late in the season there were probably some illness and injury issues, but I just don't know, Daniel. I don't know how the line got so bad in one year. The big change was Mike Yursich, and James is not so subtly hinted that he's got to keep reminding Mike to not abandon the run. I don't know how much of that had an impact, but if you're James Franklin and you see these guys take some steps back, what do you think what do you think he might be thinking about? I know recruiting is the priority now. He's got the signing day coming up, December 15th, but he's not been one. If he's unhappy, he's not been one to waste time. So, in your mind, is the way that the offense struggled? Is there somebody that might be held accountable, or do you think that James believes, Phil Troutline's just entering his third year, Yursich is in his second year, Jahan Sider is regarded as a really good recruiter? Do you think some people are probably? Do you think he'll make some changes, or do you think he could? Would you be surprised if somebody was sent packing?
I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah,
At this point in college football, nothing really
yeah,
surprises you anymore with kind of moves on the coaching front.
yeah,
I do think that you have to reevaluate and figure
yeah,
out how to get all of this on the same page. I don't know if it was Troutline and Yursich, whatever they wanted to happen, not
yeah,
being on the same page, Cider and Yursich, like whatever
yeah,
combination you want to choose. I think it was pretty clear that things were not on, just not in rhythm this year. And you were right. I mean, the regression of guys like Miranda and Walker this year was pretty startling. I don't necessarily know, where you kind of where that came from, but I think that this offseason that really has to be a priority: offensive line, running back, and to get it going.
Bob Flounders and Daniel Gallen, Blue White Breakdown podcast. We're talking about the offensive selections, the All Big Ten team. And Daniel, we were going through after you get past John Dotson, it's a little bit of a slow year for Penn State, deservedly so. What I was going to ask you is, you look at the offensive line, Mike Miranda, All Big Ten second team last year, honorable mention this year, Rasheed Walker. I mean, I don't think he was. I mean, I thought he was much better in 2019 and 2020 than he was this year. So Phil Troutwine finishes his second season. Mike Yursich is in his first season as OC. Jahan Sider is in his fourth year as running backs coach. They certainly didn't get it done, Daniel, either. Usually, when a coach gets a nice little extension and the fan base is unhappy and the numbers back up the fan base's unhappiness, I mean, if you look around the country, somebody usually has to fall on the sword. I don't know that James Franklin will do that. I wouldn't be surprised if someone does go. Do you think James Franklin may just lean towards keeping these guys together, or do you think he's just going to have some hard conversations with all of his offensive assistants and say, "Look, this is what we need to be doing. If you don't agree with me, you need to tell me now."
Yeah, I think that they need to figure out how to get everyone on the same page, whether that means needing to do a personnel change, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I do think that you need to figure out what the combination was. Was it Troutwine and Yurcich that weren't on the same page? Was it Yurcich and Sider that weren't on the same page? You need to figure out where the source of that disconnect was and then go from there. I do think when you look at kind of the past couple of years under Franklin, kind of the turnover and upheaval that they've had at offensive line coach, at offensive coordinator. I think Sean Clifford referenced the number of offensive coordinators that he had at Penn State after that game on Saturday. I mean, I think that you kind of got to decide, like, all right, do we lean on continuity and try to hope that this is going to get better, or do we try to shake things up again? So I think that those are kind of the two options, and both have pros, both have cons.
Yeah, so I think the Brent Pry news, which obviously Dave Jones and I talked about on an earlier Blue White Breakdown podcast. We can certainly do that, but I mean, that was the one. So I can remember you and I were talking in the Chili's airport in Detroit as we got ready to come back home from Detroit and our lovely wintry stay in East Lansing, in the greater East Lansing area. We were talking about, hey, be on alert for this. This could happen. Hey, what should we be focusing on? And Brent Pry always kind of flirts with, this was nothing new for him to be considered, but this was a high profile job, and he's turned down some jobs that were not as good as this job. But that one, the minute you relax on the Brent Pry possibly leaving beat, there he goes out the door. So I have a funny feeling with the transfer portal coming and going, with maybe a couple of coaching changes possibly, and with recruiting, all that stuff, the next 5-6 weeks, I think, are going to be very interesting. I think got to be prepared for everything. I didn't even mention the bowl game announcement that's coming on Sunday, but as off seasons go, it's really not the off season, Daniel, to like May. That's probably the easiest way to look at it. So you just got to be ready for anything, and who knows what's coming next. But we probably would be remiss not to talk a little bit about the all Big Ten selections on defense. I'm much more familiar with those, as are you. You've been doing a great job of getting all that stuff out there on PennLive. But Daniel, I thought it was a no-brainer that Arnold Ebiketie and Jaquan Brisker were going to be first-team choices. That did come to pass. What did you make of Penn State's representation on the all Big Ten teams, first, second, and third?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Penn State defense was one of the best units in the Big Ten and one of the best units in the country this year, and I think that was accurately reflected in the voting from the coaches and the media. I think if you go through it, between first team, second team, third team, honorable mention, 10 of Penn State's 11 starters all picked up some honor, and you have a really good case that maybe if the season was 2 weeks longer or something, Derek Tangelo would have been the 11th, because he was playing at a very high level down the stretch after PJ Mustipher went down. So I think that you look at it, Ebiketie and Brisker on the first team, no brainers, like definitely. PJ Mustipher on the second team was a little bit surprising given that he played less than half of a season, but I think that that was voted on by the coaches. So I think that that's kind of some respect for him and the value that he adds. Ellis Brooks, second teamer in the coaches vote. I think that makes a lot of sense. He was very productive. Wasn't necessarily as flashy as Brandon Smith and Curtis Jacobs. Smith was third team by the coaches, honorable mention by media, and Jacobs was honorable mention. But I think Ellis Brooks was he was just consistent in the middle. And that's kind of what you want out of that job, out of that spot there. And then if we keep going down the list, Jair Brown, on the third team for the coaches. He had 56 solo tackles this year, which is a lot.
Right.
I got Joey Porter Jr. also made third team defense. I got a couple emails asking about that. There were some struggles down the stretch, I think, and
Absolutely.
I don't think people were happy with the penalties, but I think that I thought that his overall body of work this year was fine. And that obviously you got to get the penalties cleaned up, but I don't know. I mean, with
Yeah.
playing cornerback today, whether it's in the NFL, college football, there's such little things. I think that like one of those pass interference calls against Michigan State, the guy just kind of stopped or slowed
Yeah.
down and he
He
ran
ran
into him.
Yeah.
And you can't do that, but also,
How do you get out of the way? Right.
yeah.
Those are
Just
correctable things. Those are correctable things, Daniel. I thought he's, in terms of they ask him that they allow him to play a lot of man to man. And I thought he's a physical player. And I still think that he's another guy, you talk about guys, he could, he's eligible for the draft, but I really think another year at Penn State would really, really help him. And James talked about correcting the grabs that, getting grabby. And if he takes that next step and can eliminate those penalties, you're talking about a terrific corner with great size, great speed, and great length.
Yeah, definitely. I think that maybe like at the halfway mark of the season, he looked like a guy that could definitely go. But I think down the stretch, we kind of saw it where if
Yeah.
he could kind of do the Brisker thing where you come back and you go from day
Yeah.
2 or early day 3 to potential day 1 in the draft. And then to round out the rest of the all Big Ten guys, Jesse Luketa, a third teamer, an honorable mention. Tariq Castro Fields, honorable mention, and then Curtis Jacobs, like I already mentioned, as honorable mention. So
Yeah.
a lot of familiar names there and a lot of guys who made big plays this year.
Very happy for Jesse Luketa, who really, I mean, he was a starter, but he wasn't. Tarburton played a lot. Nick Tarburton played a lot, but more often than not, Jesse came off the bench. He missed the game. I think he missed the Maryland game.
Mm-hmm.
So the production I thought was tremendous. His versatility, his athleticism, his leadership. He's come a long way. I remember him in the 2018 class with Micah, and I wasn't sure if Jesse was ever going to have an every down role, just as an inside linebacker, because those guys are freaks. I mean, they are physical freaks. It's not enough to be 6'3", 250. You got to move like you're a little bit lighter than that. And credit to James Franklin and credit to Brent Pry for creating a role for him that will get him on the field more as essentially an outside linebacker in a 3-4 who could kind of set the edge, because his strength is one of the greater assets that he has, I think. And for him to accept that role and accept that, he wasn't always going to be out there starting, and he was going to be essentially in a little bit of a timeshare with Nick Tarburton. A lot of kids, don't handle that well. The transfer portal is always, open if you don't like what you hear. But Penn State was able to create a role for him. He was able to embrace it. He gets all Big Ten recognition. Now he's going to the Senior Bowl. I'm very happy for him. I think he has exceeded, maybe his expectations at Penn State. Just one quick thought on Brandon Smith. I thought, his first 8 games in the Big Ten this year were literally first team or second team all Big Ten caliber. He just the last few games, he missed some tackles. You remember the Haskins run on that flat pass where he evaded him. He evaded him in the Michigan game. That was a key play. He missed a tackle that was pretty critical, I think, in the Michigan State game in the second half that could have maybe gotten that defense off the field. They sound like small things. It was a lousy field. It was icy. Penn State fans zero in on that. But I'm telling you, athletically, he is very close to being a tremendous player. I know he's already on the NFL radar. I'll be curious to see what he does, because, it's one thing for the media and even the Big Ten coaches to view him in one way. But as we said last year, Jahan Dotson led the Big Ten in receiving yards, and he was a third team all Big Ten pick. So I'll be curious to see what kind of feedback maybe he gets from the NFL if he's tempted to leave. And if he does come back, it's great for Penn State, but I'm just wondering how he and his family are going to view maybe this this third team selection. But I just wish the consistency just wasn't there down the stretch.
Yeah, I think that James Franklin kind of mentioned it with the defense in general, with the missed tackles, is that
Yeah.
there was kind of a lot of hitting and not a lot of wrapping up. And you look at some of those Brandon Smith missed tackles where if he connects on the hit, they're big highlight reel plays,
Right.
but instead they turn into offensive gains. And I think that that's kind of the next step for him, is consistency. But the flashes are there,
Sure.
and he's a former 5-star, so he's been kind of on this trajectory. And I think that the type of athlete that he is, I think, will be really, really appealing for NFL scouts. So that's an interesting one to watch. I think that it's hard to square. It's difficult sometimes when you can't square the production with the physical tools that you see. But at the same time, the NFL, I mean, they're mostly looking for potential and projection. And I think that Brandon Smith projects very well.
Yeah. What I would like to see Penn State do with him is I think Brandon is at his best when he's moving forward, closer to the box, whether it's a run blitz or even a pass rush or a loop. I mean, he can certainly cover, but I think that that's not necessarily what he's good at. If you look at some of the tackles he missed, the two big ones I mentioned, Michigan State and Michigan, I think he was in pass coverage in both of those. And I just don't know if maybe that's, you look at what Micah Parsons is now doing with Dallas. He's at the line of scrimmage. He's either pass rushing as an end, or he's in the box. Once in a while they'll use him to cover. But I just think that with Brandon Smith, I think the more they have him doing closer to the line of scrimmage, I think the more impact he's going to make. I wonder if he would come back, if you would see maybe a different looking Brandon Smith in 2022 with an emphasis on blitzing and even pass rushing. Late in Micah's career at Penn State, they turned him loose in the Cotton Bowl against Memphis, at the end of his second year, and the results were just astounding. And he's kind of just been able to build on that. That's my Brandon Smith. Rant for now. But Daniel, as we kind of wrap up the Blue White Breakdown podcast here. I know you're going to talk probably a little bit about this with Dustin Hockensmith when you guys do yours a little bit later in the week, because I know you delve quite a bit into the recruiting. As we get closer to signing day with no Brent Pry, should the Penn State fans be concerned at all about, I don't think they should. I don't think that any Penn State verbals are thinking about, leaving because Brent Pry is not there. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I kind of look at it similarly. I mean, this class has been together for so long and seems to be pretty tight that, I mean, there's always the chance that there's going to be movement. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. That's the nature of this business. So it wouldn't be a surprise if there's a little bit of shuffling down the stretch. But I think that when you look at kind of the guys on the Penn State staff that are kind of the game changers, I think that that's more Terry Smith, Jawan Sider, maybe Taylor Stubblefield. Those are the guys that I think do a lot of heavy lifting and kind of really define the recruiting and putting the class together. So obviously there's a chance a guy could have had a really close connection with Brent Pry. There's a chance that he saw this defense. That's the defense that he wanted to play in. But I think that the way that this class was constructed, when it was constructed, and how it stuck together, I think that there's not really running the risk of a raft of decommitments in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see what James does with because when you replace Brent Pry, you're replacing a guy who wore a lot of hats at Penn State. James Franklin wears 10 as the CEO. You can make a case of Brent Pry wore 5 or 6. He was James's confidant. They had a great relationship. He was, a recruiter. He was the linebackers coach. He was the coordinator. He just, I think, and, if you're the coordinator, you really got to know everything about the defense, the back end, all of it. So it's a pretty critical hire, I think, for James. And I'll be curious to see who he picks. But if you pick a defensive coordinator, your next defensive coordinator, and if he doesn't have any experience coaching linebackers, that could potentially be a problem. So I wonder how he's going to attack. This issue, because I know that Joe Lorig, I think on his title at Penn State, he's the special teams coordinator, but I think he's also the coach of the outside linebackers. I don't know if that's still the case. Maybe there's a way that you could have him just coach the linebackers if James chooses just to go with a defensive coordinator that does not have experience with linebackers. I just thought of that at the last second because I was like, how is he going to solve? Oh, wait, Joe Lorig can coach linebackers. Duh. So maybe that's the fix. But what I wanted to say to you is, if I wanted to ask you if you had any thoughts at all on what you think Brent might do. And also, I know you got to get to the basketball game tonight. I think Penn State Hoops is playing Miami. So my other question to you is, where are you going to fit in time to play that guitar that's behind over your left shoulder under the pennant? You don't think you could sneak that behind the plant? Don't you dare try and. I can't believe James Franklin didn't spy that when he was asking you questions. But I see a guitar. Is there going to be any time this offseason for you to play that guitar? So one, your thoughts on Pry. Two, can you get some guitar time in?
I'll definitely be able to get some guitar time in. That'll be more, I think, maybe after the bowl game.
Okay.
I think that's where more time for that. But yeah, overall, I was thinking about this too when we were talking about Brandon Smith as kind of the role of these linebackers could really change depending on who the defensive coordinator is, depending who they bring in to coach the position. I know that James highlighted it during one of the Wednesday nights, talking about how Penn State played 3 linebackers more than a lot of other teams, especially and against kind of spread offenses with 3 wide receivers on the field. They'd keep 3 linebackers out there, line up Curtis Jacobs over the slot. And I thought that was really interesting, especially, I mean, I spent 3 years covering a Jim Schwartz defense that the base defense was essentially nickel for most of it. I mean, the third linebacker was kind of an afterthought. So I thought that was really interesting, and I'm kind of interested to see if that continues, how that philosophy changes. And then overall, I saw some of the comments people were making about Pry and kind of his defenses and that defensive style.
They're not.
Yeah.
Fans. Yeah.
It kind of reminded me, it actually did kind of remind me a little bit of Jim Schwartz in Philadelphia. I mean, I think Brent Pry was appreciated a little bit more than Schwartz was by the end, but there is an element of competence there. There's an element of they know what they're doing. It might not necessarily work all the time, but I think that it's kind of like you could do a lot worse than what's here. And there's only a slight chance that you could really do better in those positions. So, I mean, obviously you saw Penn State was kind of middle of the pack in terms of total defense, passing defense, rushing defense, but the red zone defense is at the top.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what it's about.
Yeah, and you know I get a lot of the same comments about Brent Pry. Look, was he the best defensive coordinator in the Big Ten? Probably not. No, he wasn't. But his teams, I thought, were always well prepared. I thought one of the things that really worked against Brent Pry was that, you know, other than 2016 and 2017, and I'll tell you exactly why. Penn State fans still have not forgotten that 2016 season when they scored 49 points in the Rose Bowl and lost to USC and they had like a big lead in the fourth quarter. That to me, and then the next year they're at Ohio State and they lose 39-38 and they're up 15, I think, in the fourth quarter. I think those 2 games really, Penn State fans have long memories, and I think that kind of formed their opinion of Pry. But recently, especially this year, I thought, in today's game, Daniel, you're supposed to score in the 30s pretty easily. Like, you're supposed to get into the mid 30s pretty easily, occasionally in the 40s. James Franklin talked about that before he brought in, I think, Mike Yursich. And, they never scored in the 30s without help from their defense, I think, this year in the Big Ten. They scored 28 against Auburn. And, the way that the game is now and the way that the athletes are and the way that the rules are, it's just, if you can't score in the 30s, I don't know that it's necessarily the defense's fault. If you lose some of these tight games, you lose 21-17 to Michigan, and the offense just can't do much. You lose 20-18 in 9 overtimes to Illinois. Yeah, they gave up 357 rushing yards, but they only gave up 10 points in regulation. So I think that Brent Pry deserved a little bit more appreciation. He's not the flashiest of guys, but I think that die was cast at 16 and 17 on some people's opinions of Brent Pry. And I think moving forward, it doesn't really matter how good the defensive coordinator is at Penn State if this offense can't score consistently in the mid-30s in Big Ten games.
Well said, Bob.
All right. I know you got some guitar plucking to do, and I know you got basketball assignment. It's going to be an interesting weekend, Daniel. Thanks for climbing on board this week as your inaugural podcast with me in the off season. Fans, you can look for us. Dave and I are going to do one. Dave Jones and I are going to do one. Daniel and I will do one. He's going to do one with Dustin Hawkins-Smith. The Blue White Breakdown podcasts are never going away. They're never going to be very far from you. You can always find one of us ranting and raving, on all the spots you can find our podcast: Spotify, Stitcher. I put up PennLive posts. It's on YouTube. There's videos. You'd be crazy not to listen at least a couple times a week. All right, so that's it for now. Daniel's got to get going. I got to get going. We'll talk to you guys soon.